In PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, you're going to come across a lot of different scopes. Some good, some bad, and some even uglier than others. One particular scope will give you a big advantage, and the other one will mess up your aim and view. Today, we're going to check out all the scopes in Battlegrounds, and the next time that you play your favorite game, you will know exactly which scope to keep and which ones to swap. A lot of guys have requested a comparison between all the different iron sights, so let's start there. Most people claim that the M416 has the best iron sight of all assault rifles in Battlegrounds, so let's see if they were right. Let's remove the scope and then we end up with this, the basic iron sights of the M416. Okay, it's clear for an iron sight. It doesn't block too much of your screen and there is enough open space next to the very center part of the iron sight that you use to aim. This makes it easier for you to track your enemy if he is on the move, and you can easily use it to lead your target. So far, it seems that they were right, but let's compare it with the other iron sights so that we know for sure. The M16A4 is thinner, so it covers less of your screen, but it's less clear in the area where it matters. It covers more of the part that you use to aim. In other words, it will be more difficult to track your target and you will have a harder time making small corrections with the center of the iron sights. The Scar L is super thin, it's like an iron sights on a diet. The problem is that it's way too thick in the area that we use to actually aim at our enemy, so good luck trying to lead your target with this one. The AKM is completely different. The biggest issue is that the weapon itself blocks most of your view, and in contrast, the actual iron sight itself is super tiny. This works well in real life, but in Battlegrounds it's just way too small. I find it easier to use the U-shaped form that you can see in the front of the iron sight. It's less accurate, but at least I can see it in all situations. So it seems that the M416 has the best iron sights. I will compare the M416 with a red dot, and I will show you all the other ones in the top right corner. One thing that I have to mention with these comparisons is that I sometimes have to use a different weapon to show a certain scope. This will change the overall look around the base of the weapon, but the direct area around the scope will be the same. So focus on that, because it's almost impossible to find a 15x scope and all the different weapons at the same time. The M416 has a great iron sights to start with, but things can be improved, especially when you find a red dot. The world around you will be a whole lot clearer now. The dot of the red dot is easy to see, and the black housing, if I may call it that, is super thin, so it won't get in your way when you have to lead your target. When we compare a red dot with a holographic sight, then you know why most of you have always swapped away from the holographic sight. It's just way too big and it blocks too much of your view. The holographic sight is good enough for close range engagements, but I found that it lacks precision when you try to kill a guy who is further away. It even blocks a big part of the view around the weapon itself. Not that you will use that area often, but you will never know. Getting your hands on your next chicken dinner depends a lot on these smaller details, so never say never. I have to admit that the area within the holographic sight is a lot bigger than the red dot itself, so it might be easier to lead your target, but then the circle and the dot block more of your view than when you just see one red dot, so you lose precision. When we compare the red dot with the 2x scope, then things get even worse. Sure, you can zoom in more, I will give you that, but I can't see very much anymore of the surrounding area. I can't even see much of the top of my screen anymore. Why is this thing so big? The housing is super thick as well. Most of the time I will swap away from this scope as soon as I find a red dot. I personally don't feel that the advantage of the increased zoom outweighs the fact that you can't see much of your screen anymore. Both of these scopes are attached on an M416, and for the red dot your character will hold the weapon further away from you. When you attach a 2x scope, then your character will bring the weapon closer to you, blocking even more of your view. Most of us are used to a scope that has a red color. Some of us change things around when we play a game like Battlefield for example, but using a green scope in a game that takes place outdoors most of the time with a lot of green trees doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. Would you swap a 2x scope for a holographic sight? This question is a little bit more difficult to answer. They are both thick scopes and they block different parts of the screen, so it will depend on which part of the screen that you actually want to see. The center of the holographic sight is definitely smaller than the center of the 2x scope, but that one zooms in more, so it doesn't necessarily mean that you will see more of the area that you're looking at. If you watch closely, then you can see that the holographic sight is still thinner in the area where it matters most, and it's red, so that are definitely two key features that can make a difference. What about a red dot versus a 4x scope? I already know what your preference is, the 4x, right? And gameplay wise it makes sense. It will give you a bigger advantage over a red dot because it's easier to go for headshots with a 4x scope. But the red dot looks tiny compared to the 4x, right? I never realized in game that there was such a big difference in size. The 4x scope blocks a relatively big part of your screen. It comes close to blocking almost 1/3 of your screen. The great thing about the 4x scope is the magnification. It makes sense in Battlegrounds, and it's probably the most versatile scope that you can find. The magnification hits a sweet spot for this game. It doesn't zoom in too much so that it's unusable in close range firefights, and it zooms in enough so that you can easily kill most enemies. You don't really need more, because most of the time the line of sight doesn't allow that anyway. It all has to do with how the map was designed. The reticle of the 4x scope is great, because it's very easy to use in Battlegrounds. A red dot versus an 8x scope. I know that it doesn't really make sense to compare them, but at least you saw it once, and then we can go over to the 4x against the 8x, which is more useful. The red dot even looks smaller than before, and it's pretty clear that you can't see anything of the surrounding area outside of the 8x scope, but that's not the point. It is designed to give you a nice zoomed in part in the center of your screen. That's what the 8x scope is all about. The center of the 4x scope is relatively small compared to the 8x. The center part of the 8x scope is almost as big as the entire 4x scope, but the 4x still allows you to see the area around the scope. The markings on the 4x scope are very clear, and they're a lot easier to use. The markings or the mil dots on the 8x scope are pretty unusable. You will have to guess, or you will have to use the practice shot method. I haven't been able to confirm this yet, but apparently the first mil dot on an 8x scope is about 900 meters. That is why you will have to guess for all the other ranges, because you don't have any reference, so the practice shot method is probably the best way to go. The zoom level is much better for the 8x scope, and it's perfectly suited to give a nice headshot on a stationary target, even if he's relatively close to you. But things become a little bit more difficult when that guy is running around. So, for a moving enemy who isn't running around on the other side of the map, it's easier to kill him using a 4x scope. In an ideal world, you would be able to swap the 8x for a 4x scope and then again for a red dot. That would be perfect. But what do you do when you pick up 3 8x scopes? It took me a lot of effort to get my hands on all of those, only to come to the conclusion that it doesn't make sense at all. Even 2 8x scopes is way too much for one loadout. Long range monster, but no versatility. Yes, if you weren't aware, there is a 15x scope in PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds. The only problem is getting your hands on it. You can't just pick it up. You will never find it lying around in some remote building. The only two ways of getting your hands on the 15x scope is to pick it up from an airdrop or to steal it out of the hands of a dead enemy who picked it up from an airdrop. I will show you what it looks like compared to a red dot, but there's no point comparing them. The center part of the 15x scope is bigger than an entire 4x scope. That says it all, right? The great thing about the 15x, besides the zoom, is that you can almost use the entire screen. It only blocks a small part. Just make sure that you zoom in directly on your target, otherwise it might be a little bit difficult to find him with such a high magnification. The 8x scope and the 15x scope are very similar, except for the magnification of course. They both cover the outside of your screen and they have similar markings. The 15x blocks a lot less of your screen and some of the mil dots coincide with the ones of the 8x, but not all of them. So watch out when you have the luxury to go from one scope to the other. Okay guys, you just saw all of the scopes in PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds. You saw how much of the screen they block, and I'm sure that you now perfectly know which scopes to keep and which ones to swap. While you're here, why not check out one of these videos? And as you know, the YouTube likes and shares are very helpful to me. If you think that this video is worthy, would you mind taking a moment to like this video and to share it with all your buddies? This was Fog of Gaming, thanks for watching, and I will see you in Battlegrounds.